Laya moved through the kitchen like a ghost in the early morning light, the hum of the refrigerator filling the quiet that seemed almost too loud. She wasn't just passing time. She was thinking, feeling the familiar flutter in her chest whenever Hator was nearby. Even from across the room, his presence seemed to pull her in. Subtle, but impossible to ignore. The smell of coffee mingled with the faint scent of vanilla from the cookies their stepfather had baked the night before, grounding her just enough to remind her this was home, ordinary, mundane, but not for her. She caught a glimpse of him through the doorway, leaning casually against the frame, and her pulse skipped without her permission. It was absurd, really, the way her thoughts spiraled around him, like a moth circling a flame she knew was dangerous. Hator's grin was easy, confident, the kind that made anyone around him feel like the world was a little lighter, a little more tolerable. Laya tried to hide her quickening heartbeat behind a casual sip of coffee, but he noticed anyway, raising an eyebrow that spoke volumes in silence. Their eyes met, and in that fraction of a second, the kitchen transformed. It wasn't just about breakfast or chores anymore. It was about the tension hovering between them, unspoken yet undeniably present. The air felt thicker, charged, like a storm on the horizon no one had admitted to seeing. Even their stepfather, busy at the counter chopping vegetables, remained oblivious to the silent game being played in plain sight. And though Laya tried to push the thought away, she couldn't help but imagine what it would feel like if the door closed behind them, just for a moment. Every little interaction seemed amplified, from the brush of his hand as he reached for a plate to the slight tilt of his head as he spoke, casual words layered with something more. Laya's mind raced, juggling guilt and excitement, curiosity and fear, all tangled into a single, overwhelming emotion. She reminded herself, strictly, firmly, that they were stepping into forbidden territory, that crossing the line could change everything. But the thrill, the pull, the tiny electric moments, they were addictive. With a quiet, almost imperceptible laugh, Hator leaned closer, his voice dropping just enough for her ears only, and Laya realized the day had just begun, yet nothing would ever be quite the same again. Later that afternoon, sunlight spilled through the living room windows, painting the carpet in golden patches, and Laya found herself lingering near the sofa longer than necessary. Hator was sprawled across it with a book in hand, pretending to read but stealing glances at her every now and then. She caught him staring once, quickly looking away when their eyes met, and that brief exchange made her stomach flutter in ways she couldn't name. The house felt quieter than usual, the kind of silence that wraps around you, making every tiny sound, the tick of a clock, the creak of floorboards, feel amplified. Laya's fingers tapped against her notebook, a nervous rhythm, her mind replaying every subtle smile and lingering look from the morning. It was absurd, really, how ordinary spaces could suddenly feel so electric with unspoken desire. Hator stretched lazily, the motion drawing her attention in a way that made her chest tighten. "You've been quiet all day," he said casually, though the teasing edge in his tone betrayed his awareness. Laya forced a laugh, trying to sound normal, but she could feel the heat rising to her cheeks. He leaned a little closer, and for a heartbeat, the world seemed to shrink around them, leaving just the two of them suspended in a tension that was at once thrilling and terrifying. She reminded herself again that nothing about this was right, yet she couldn't deny the pull, the magnetic draw of his presence. The quiet murmur of the house, footsteps from upstairs, the soft clatter of dishes, acted almost as a soundtrack to the moment, a subtle reminder that this secret thrill existed within a world that remained blissfully unaware. Even the simplest exchanges became loaded. A brush of hands when passing the book, a shared look that lasted just a second too long, words that carried double meanings only they could sense. Laya's thoughts tumbled, guilt mingling with anticipation, every glance and gesture stirring feelings that felt too big to contain. She found herself imagining what it would be like to close the door, to leave the rest of the world behind, even if only for a moment. And yet part of her hesitated, aware that stepping over that invisible line could unravel everything she'd known about family and safety. The tension between them wasn't just physical, it was emotional, dangerous, and exhilarating, setting the stage for something neither of them could ignore. As evening approached, the house settled into its usual rhythm, the soft hum of the air conditioner blending with distant traffic outside. Laya found herself in the hallway, pretending to grab a book, but secretly stealing glimpses of Hator as he leaned against the wall, arms crossed, watching her with that familiar half-smile. Every subtle movement felt loaded with meaning, and she could almost hear the unspoken words between them, a conversation that existed only in stolen glances and tiny gestures. Her heart raced, a mix of excitement and fear, and she had to remind herself to breathe, to act like this was normal. Just another evening at home, but the tension had a way of clinging, wrapping around her chest in a way she couldn't shake. Heitor stepped closer, his presence suddenly more immediate than she expected, and the air between them seemed to hum with possibility. "You're avoiding me," he said, a teasing note hiding something sharper, something that made her cheeks heat even more. Laya forced a casual shrug, laughing softly, but her mind betrayed her, replaying every subtle look, every accidental touch from earlier in the day. The idea of being caught, of anyone discovering the tiny world they were creating in secret, sent a shiver down her spine, and yet the danger only made the connection feel more alive, more intense, like a spark that refused to fade. Finally, the subtle moment came, the one that changed everything. A door closed somewhere in the house, muffling the sounds outside, and suddenly they were alone in a small space that felt suspended in time. Laya's pulse throbbed in her ears as Heitor's gaze met hers, loaded with the kind of silent understanding that left no room for hesitation. Every inch of distance seemed electric, charged with unspoken possibility. She realized then that this was more than a fleeting thrill. It was the start of something that could consume them both, a secret world existing right under the nose of the oblivious family around them. And in that suspended moment, nothing else mattered except the pull they couldn't resist. The next morning, sunlight spilled unevenly across Laya's room, catching dust motes that danced lazily in the air, and she sat on the edge of her bed, notebook in hand, trying to make sense of the tangled mess inside her chest. Thoughts of Heitor refused to leave, sneaking into her mind with every blink, every mundane morning routine. She kept reminding herself that what she felt was dangerous, forbidden, yet the pull was irresistible, a magnetic force that made her stomach twist with anticipation and guilt. Outside, the sounds of the house coming to life, footsteps, laughter, the clink of dishes, felt like a separate world she could only observe from the safety of her private bubble. Laya's fingers traced the rim of her mug absent-mindedly, grounding herself even as her mind wandered, imagining what would happen if she let go just a little. The line between curiosity and temptation blurred more than ever, and she couldn't ignore it. Heitor appeared at the doorway just as she was scribbling, his casual stance belying the intensity in his eyes. "You look lost in thought," he said lightly, though there was a teasing edge in the way he spoke, the kind that made her pulse quicken. She tried to hide her reaction, but he noticed anyway, smiling knowingly. It wasn't just a glance. They shared a language of subtlety, an intimacy that existed only between the two of them, invisible to everyone else in the house. Laya felt herself leaning toward him without moving, her mind spinning with questions she wasn't sure she wanted answers to. There was thrill in the secrecy, a delicious tension that made ordinary conversations feel electric. Even the mundane act of passing a pen across the table sent shivers she couldn't explain, evidence that their connection was growing deeper, more dangerous. Their interactions that day were a delicate dance, careful yet daring, each word and gesture carefully measured but loaded with meaning. Laya struggled with the guilty knowledge that each glance and smile was bending rules she shouldn't be touching, while Heitor seemed to savor every subtle push and pull between them. Family noises came and went, reminding them that the outside world was still there, oblivious to the undercurrent of desire that pulsed beneath their casual facades. Even small touches, an accidental brush of fingers, a shared laugh at something minor, felt amplified, stretched into moments that made their hearts race. The dichotomy of public innocence and private tension was intoxicating, each interaction leaving Laya both exhilarated and terrified. She wondered how long they could keep this fragile game going without it unraveling completely. By afternoon, the house had settled into a quiet rhythm that felt almost conspiratorial, and Laya found herself stealing moments whenever she could. Heitor lounged in the living room, pretending to scroll through his phone, though she knew better. He was watching her, always watching, in the way that made her stomach flutter and her heart race simultaneously. Every laugh, every sigh, carried a weight they both understood, words unspoken but deeply felt. Laya tried to focus on a book, forcing her mind onto the pages, but her thoughts kept wandering, circling around him like bees drawn to honey. The ordinary sounds of the house, the soft hum of the refrigerator, the distant barking of a dog, the clatter of pans, somehow heightened every subtle glance between them. It was as if the walls themselves were complicit, holding in the tension and magnifying it, teasing them both. Hader shifted slightly, leaning toward her under the guise of casual curiosity. "You've got that look again," he said softly, almost a whisper, and Laya felt herself tense, caught between the urge to retreat and the pull to stay. Their proximity felt like a charged wire running through the room, unspoken energy that neither wanted to dissipate. She could hear her own heartbeat, erratic and loud, as he brushed past her just close enough to make her aware of the heat of his presence. The thrill of secrecy intertwined with a growing sense of attachment, making her emotions a chaotic tangle she didn't know how to unravel. Even in the safety of routine, their private world hummed quietly, a constant undercurrent that refused to be ignored. As the afternoon stretched on, their small interactions grew bolder, flirting with boundaries they both knew existed but hadn't yet crossed. Laya's fingers lingered on the edge of his notebook when she handed it over, a simple touch loaded with unspoken meaning. Hator caught her eye, a smile tugging at the corner of his lips, and the weight of what was happening between them became undeniable. Every gesture, every glance, held them closer to a moment they couldn't fully control. And as the sunlight shifted, spilling golden light across the floor, Laya realized that the tension wasn't just temptation, it was a bridge, fragile yet irresistible, pulling them both towards something neither was ready to define but couldn't resist exploring. Evening came softly, wrapping the house in shadows that seemed to deepen the secrecy between them. Laya lingered near the staircase, pretending to adjust a photo frame, but her eyes kept drifting toward Hator, who sat on the couch pretending to read yet clearly aware of every movement she made. Each glance they exchanged felt like a small rebellion, a silent acknowledgement of the line they were tiptoeing around. Laya's chest tightened with a mixture of thrill and guilt, her mind spinning with questions she wasn't ready to answer. The house itself seemed to hum along with their tension, creaking in quiet approval, as if it too was complicit in their secret world. Hator's voice broke the fragile silence. "You've been avoiding me all day," he teased lightly, but the warmth in his tone betrayed a curiosity that mirrored her own. Laya smiled faintly, forcing a casual shrug, yet the electricity between them was undeniable. The weight of what they were doing, what they were feeling, pressed against her heart, a thrilling and dangerous pressure that made her shiver. Every subtle brush of hands, every fleeting touch, carried a tension that made ordinary moments extraordinary. The private understanding between them had grown sharper, more insistent, pulling them into a delicate dance where each step mattered. Then, as the house quieted further and footsteps faded into the distance, the moment arrived. Brief, electric, and charged with possibility. A door closed softly, leaving them alone in a small pocket of space that felt suspended in time. Laya's pulse raced as Hator's gaze met hers, loaded with unspoken promises and silent questions neither dared voice. The tension between them was no longer just curiosity, it was desire, raw and undeniable, a current neither could resist. In that suspended second, Laya realized their secret had evolved. It wasn't fleeting anymore. It was real, complicated, and impossible to ignore, pulling them forward into a territory from which there was no easy return. The morning felt heavier than usual, the sunlight filtering through the curtains in a way that made Laya's room feel both familiar and suffocating. She sat by her window, notebook abandoned on the bed, mind racing with yesterday's stolen moments with Hator. Every glance, every subtle touch, replayed in her head like a private film she couldn't pause. The thrill of secrecy had become addictive, but so had the creeping anxiety. What if someone walked in? What if they were caught? Her fingers traced the edge of the windowsill, gripping it as if it could anchor her racing thoughts. The ordinary sounds of the house, the distant clatter of breakfast dishes, her stepfather's low humming, felt suddenly intrusive, reminding her that the world outside her tension-filled bubble carried consequences. Hator appeared in the hallway, leaning casually against the doorframe, but his presence felt anything but casual. Laya's stomach tightened as he caught her staring, the playful smirk on his face hinting at a mischief she both craved and feared. "You're quiet this morning," he said softly, though his tone carried the weight of a subtle challenge, as if daring her to acknowledge the growing tension between them. She forced a small smile, pretending normalcy, but the heat rising in her cheeks betrayed her. Every step he took, every movement, seemed calibrated to test boundaries. And she knew it, knew that the thrill of danger made her feel alive in ways she had never expected. Even the simplest moments became charged with risk. Passing him a notebook, brushing past in the hallway, or catching his eye across the room, each instance carried the possibility of discovery. Laya's mind oscillated between exhilaration and panic, imagining the consequences if someone noticed, if their secret slipped even slightly. Yet, despite the fear, the connection between them had deepened, evolving from playful attraction to something more complex, more urgent. The tension between them was no longer just a game. It was a fragile, high-stakes thread, weaving together desire, guilt, and anticipation in a way neither could untangle. By mid-afternoon, the tension had reached a point where it seemed almost tangible, hanging in the air like a thick fog. Laya found herself in the living room, pretending to scroll through her phone, but her eyes kept flicking toward Hator. He sat across from her, casually flipping through a magazine, though she knew the act was a ruse. Every so often, his gaze caught hers, holding it just long enough to make her pulse spike. The ordinary noises of the house, the hum of the refrigerator, distant chatter from outside, somehow intensified every glance, every subtle gesture. Laya's mind raced with what-ifs, each one tangled with the thrill of being so dangerously close, yet unexposed. She had never felt so alive, so simultaneously exhilarated and terrified, the combination making her heart pound in ways that were impossible to ignore. A sudden knock at the door made both of them jump, and for a fleeting second, the real world intruded, reminding them that the line they were walking was razor-thin. Laya's breath hitched as she quickly moved away from him, her heart hammering with adrenaline. Hightor's smirk returned, a mix of amusement and mischief, as though he found the near discovery as thrilling as she did. Their eyes met, a silent conversation passing between them. The danger made every connection sharper, every glance more intense. Even in the smallest moments, like sharing a laugh or exchanging a book, the stakes felt enormous, amplifying the secret they both craved but feared. Later, in the quiet of her room, Laya replayed the afternoon's events, heart still racing, fingers tracing the lines of her notebook in nervous rhythm. She thought about Hator's confident presence, the way he seemed to navigate their clandestine world with ease while she struggled to keep up. The guilt gnawed at her. What if their stepfather noticed? What if someone else walked in? Yet the pull was undeniable, a magnetic force that made her crave even the smallest signs of attention. Each near discovery, each brush with exposure intensified their bond, creating a cocktail of thrill and fear that neither could resist. And as the day faded into evening, she realized that the delicate balance they were maintaining was becoming harder to control, the risks escalating with every heartbeat. As night settled over the house, shadows stretched across the rooms, giving ordinary corners a sense of intimacy and secrecy. Laya lingered in the hallway, pretending to check the mail, but her gaze kept drifting toward Hator, who was lounging near the staircase with an almost casual ease that made her heart skip. Every small movement between them, a brush of fingers, a shared glance, the way he shifted closer, carried an intensity that left her both exhilarated and anxious. The house felt alive in a different way now, as if aware of the secret tension pulsing beneath its surface. She could almost hear the walls whispering, holding their secret tightly, urging them forward while cautioning restraint. A sudden creak from upstairs made Laya flinch, and Hightor's smirk betrayed a hint of amusement at her reaction. "Relax," he whispered softly, his voice barely audible, yet it seemed to vibrate through the space between them. The mix of thrill and fear tightened around her chest like a vice, and she realized just how addictive the danger had become. Every near discovery, the footsteps, the almost caught moments, was a reminder of how fragile their little world was, but also how exhilarating. The line between public and private, right and wrong, was growing increasingly blurry, and neither of them seemed willing to step back. By the time the house fell into quiet stillness, Laya and Hator shared one of those fleeting charged moments that seemed suspended in time. A door clicked softly somewhere, leaving them alone in a pocket of tension that pulsed with unspoken desire. Laya's heartbeat thundered in her ears as Hightor's gaze locked on hers, a silent acknowledgement of the dangerous attraction threading between them. In that suspended second, everything became clearer. Their secret was no longer a game. It had evolved into a private world of temptation and longing, fragile yet irresistible, and each passing moment brought them closer to crossing boundaries they hadn't fully imagined. And in that moment, Laya realized there was no turning back, not without risk, not without surrender. The house felt different that evening, charged with a tension that neither Laya nor Hightor could ignore. Shadows danced across the walls as the sunset filtered through the curtains, painting the rooms in shades of amber and gold. Laya lingered near the doorway, pretending to tidy up, but every nerve in her body was attuned to him. Hater leaned casually against the wall, watching her with that familiar mix of confidence and curiosity, and for a moment, the world outside their little bubble seemed to disappear. The pull between them was magnetic, undeniable, and each subtle glance, each accidental brush of hands, felt like stepping closer to a line neither wanted to cross but both were drawn toward. Her chest tightened, her pulse quickened, and she knew that tonight, the fragile balance they had maintained would be tested. Hater stepped a little closer, reducing the space between them in a way that felt deliberate, yet effortless. "You're thinking about it," he said softly, his tone teasing but loaded with something more. Something that made her shiver. Laya forced a laugh, trying to mask the tension that hummed through her veins, but she knew he could see right through it. Every word, every glance, every tiny movement was a dance they both knew the steps to, yet the music had grown faster, more intense. Laya's thoughts tumbled between curiosity, desire, and the gnawing fear of discovery. Each moment spent in this charged proximity left her both exhilarated and anxious, craving more while fearing the consequences. The room seemed to shrink around them, every creak of the floorboards, every distant sound from other parts of the house, amplifying the intensity. Laya's mind raced, imagining the possibilities, the consequences, the thrill of giving in just a little further. Hightor's gaze never wavered, steady and knowing, and she felt herself leaning inward, drawn by the magnetic force of their shared secret. The tension between them was no longer subtle. It was raw, almost tangible, and it wrapped around them like a coil, tightening with every heartbeat. Laya realized that tonight would be different, that something fundamental was about to shift in the dynamic they had built so carefully, and there was no turning back from the pull that bound them together. By late evening, the house had quieted to a near-silent hum, the kind that makes every small sound, creaking floors, distant ticking clocks, feel magnified. Laya found herself in the living room, pretending to scroll through her phone, but her attention was entirely on Hightor. He sat nearby, casually relaxed yet alert, as if he knew every move she made, every flicker of hesitation. Their shared glances carried a weight now, a magnetic pull that neither wanted to resist. Laya felt the thrill of secrecy wrap around her like a warm, dangerous cloak, each moment charged with anticipation and risk. Even ordinary gestures, a brush of hands, the subtle shift of his body closer, felt electric, loaded with meaning neither could fully articulate. Hightor leaned in slightly, his presence impossible to ignore. "You know," he murmured, his voice low, intimate. "We're running out of time before someone notices." Laya's pulse spiked at the words, a mix of fear and exhilaration coiling in her stomach. Every heartbeat felt amplified, every breath a reminder of the fragile tension threading between them. She realized the connection they shared had deepened beyond mere flirtation. Emotions were entwining with desire, pulling them toward boundaries that once seemed unthinkable. The mixture of secrecy, longing, and risk created a potent cocktail, intoxicating and irresistible, making every small interaction feel monumental. The room seemed to shrink, the shadows wrapping around them, giving the impression that the rest of the world had ceased to exist. Laya's mind raced, imagining the possibilities if they surrendered to the pull, if they allowed themselves a moment of complete vulnerability. Hightor's gaze held hers, steady and compelling, inviting her to cross a line she had long feared but increasingly wanted to explore. Their private world had become a fragile, electric space, where every subtle movement carried weight, and Laya understood that the dynamic between them was evolving, shifting into something deeper, more intense, and entirely consuming. In that quiet, charged moment, the boundary between caution and surrender blurred, leaving them teetering on the edge of an irresistible decision. Night had fully fallen, and the house lay under a soft, velvety darkness, every corner steeped in secrecy. Laya lingered near the doorway, pretending to check a photo frame, but her attention never left Hater. He sat on the couch, casual but alert, every movement deliberate, every glance charged. The air between them was thick, almost tangible, pulsing with the anticipation of a boundary about to be crossed. Laya's heartbeat echoed in her ears, each thrum a reminder that their secret world was growing more intense, more impossible to ignore. The thrill of their clandestine connection had deepened into something dangerous, magnetic, a force neither could resist. Hayter's voice was soft, almost a whisper, yet it seemed to vibrate through the quiet room. "We can't keep pretending this isn't happening," he said, his eyes locked on hers, heavy with unspoken desire. Laya's breath caught between fear and exhilaration, between restraint and surrender. Every brush of their hands, every fleeting touch, felt magnified, weighted with emotion they hadn't fully named. The delicate balance they had maintained for so long was shifting, tilting toward a place that was at once thrilling and terrifying. She realized that the line they were tiptoeing along was about to disappear entirely, leaving them exposed to both their own desires and the consequences lurking just beyond the door. In that suspended moment, time seemed to slow, the house fading into the background as the tension between them stretched taut. Laya felt the pull of Hator's gaze, the unspoken invitation in his posture, and knew that their secret would no longer remain contained. What had begun as subtle attraction had evolved into something more potent, more consuming, and more impossible to resist. Every moment together now carried the weight of risk, of desire, and of the uncharted territory they were stepping into. And as they lingered in that charged silence, Laya realized that the next step would define everything, pushing them both toward a turning point from which there was no easy return. The house felt unusually still that morning, a quiet that carried weight, as if it sensed the tension threading through every room. Laya sat by the window, watching sunlight spill across the floor, her mind a whirl of anticipation and apprehension. Hator's presence lingered even in his absence, a constant pull she could neither resist nor ignore. Each glance, each whispered word, each fleeting touch from the previous night replayed vividly in her mind, intensifying the mix of desire and fear coiling inside her. The reality of their secret, the knowledge that one misstep could unravel everything, pressed on her chest with a thrilling, suffocating weight. Even the ordinary sounds of the house, the distant hum of the refrigerator, the soft creak of floorboards, felt amplified, echoing with the unspoken tension between them. Hator appeared in the doorway, leaning casually yet purposefully, the kind of ease that belied the storm of emotions swirling beneath. "Morning," he said softly, but the weight in his gaze suggested he knew the fragile tension had reached a tipping point. Laya's pulse quickened at the sight of him, every nerve alive with a mixture of excitement and fear. Their connection had deepened beyond physical attraction. It was now emotional, a bond threaded with shared secrets, risk, and the thrill of near discovery. Every small gesture, from a brush of fingers to a fleeting smile, carried the weight of unspoken desire, making the ordinary extraordinary. Laya realized that the line between private and public, desire and danger, had blurred completely. As they moved through the house that morning, their interactions were heightened, each word and movement charged with meaning. Laya's mind spun with possibilities and consequences, her thoughts tangled in the web of emotions and secrecy they had created together. Hator's confidence contrasted with her careful hesitations, the dynamic between them electric and unrelenting. Even in mundane routines, pouring coffee, passing a notebook, exchanging a look, the tension pulsed, a constant reminder of the forbidden intimacy that had grown between them. And though neither spoke openly about the depth of their connection, it was impossible to ignore. Their secret had become a world unto itself, thrilling, consuming, and dangerously close to revelation. By mid-afternoon, the tension between them had grown into something nearly unbearable, like electricity crackling in the air just before a storm. Laya found herself in the living room, pretending to read, but her eyes never left Hator. He sat nearby, casual and composed, yet every movement, every subtle shift of his posture, seemed designed to draw her in. Their connection was undeniable, a potent mix of desire, secrecy, and anticipation that made the